A little funky stylish for Purim, don't you think?
Absolutely. How's the
Right? You got some excitement going on at Congregation Road of Shalom.
Yeah, we do. It's an interesting year.
Oh, oh boy.
It rains, it pours.
Right. I know.
Yeah.
I know.
Are you good? You're good otherwise? Everything is
Yeah,
happening okay?
everybody's fine. I mean,
Good.
fine. Yeah, I'm as fine as
Considering.
fine can be these days, right?
Good. Oops,
Yeah.
sorry, just lifting my dog up here. There we go.
Oh, let me
This is
here,
Kiki.
Sushi.
This is Kiki.
Hi, Kiki. Oh my goodness, Kiki.
Yeah,
Oh,
I've
Tell
had
me.
her for 4 years.
Oh my goodness.
we
So, Kiki a poodle or a doodle?
She's a poodle Bichon mix.
Aha. We have a Australian Labradoodle here, Teddy,
Uh,
white
yeah,
like yours, but he's and they're just incredible. They're just
I love
so
them.
beautiful, right?
And great companions in a pandemic.
Ah, don't you know it? Don't
Yep.
you know it? That is for sure, right? And I'm just gonna make sure internet is all okay today. Welcome everyone. I might lose you for a
oh,
second, but don't panic. I'll be right back. Okay, good. Good morning, everyone. If Cantor Gurney's wearing a chapeau, it must almost be Purim, right? Right? You gotta,
absolutely.
you gotta, gotta do something a little frivolous and fun and different as we prepare for Purim, our most fun of all Jewish occasions, right? Although it definitely has a dark side for sure, which we'll get into in a little bit. So today, as promised, we're going to dig into Megillat Esther, the Scroll of Esther. We talked a little bit about it last week. So let me begin just with a little review and a little deeper background on the scroll itself. And here is the scroll itself. Right? I have the, let me say it this way, I have the Ganze Megillah. I have the entire Megillah right here in my hands. Notice that it's a scroll, right? It's not on wooden spindles like a Torah scroll is. It's not intended to be. It's supposed to just like this and fits into this beautifully adorned
Wow.
case, right?
Yeah.
A scroll, right? And opens up in the middle, and of course, the inside is velvet, right?
Wow.
That's its little bed where it lives the rest of the year, right? And a little later, we'll get into chanting from the scroll itself. So I've done some good research, and let me start off by recommending this author to you. His name is Robert Alter, Alter, Robert Alter. He is professor of Hebrew literature and language at Berkeley. He's one of the world's leading scholars on the Hebrew Bible and its translation. Towering genius scholar. I mentioned his name because he's now finished his seminal life work, which is retranslating with commentary the entire Hebrew biblical canon from a literary point of view. Right? He's not a theologian, but a literary scholar and critic, and it's fascinating to approach our biblical text from that vantage point. And I will be referring a little bit to his translation and his commentary of the Scroll of Esther, right? Just a little bit, but here's just some background first of all, about the Scroll of Esther. Number one, and this is fascinating to me, it's the only biblical text which was not discovered in the caves of Qumran, the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's the only biblical text that not even a scrap of the Scroll of Esther was found in Qumran. Every other biblical text was represented in that collection, which may tell us a few things. Number one, that the Essenes had no use for such a text. They couldn't, if they saw today that it had been included into the biblical canon, they would be aghast, right, for a number of reasons. And yet, this crazy 10 chapters, the Scroll of Esther, was admitted to the biblical canon, and to this day stands maybe outside the Torah itself, maybe the most well-known to a certain extent of all the entire Hebrew Bible, right? That's probably because of a number of reasons, and we'll get into that. So scholars, including Robert Alter, date the writing of the Scroll of Esther sometime in the late 5th century BCE.
You've got mail.
Oh, good. I'm glad to know I've gotten mail. Or somebody's gotten mail. Good movie. Late 5th century BCE. It is not based on any real historical events at all. Okay. It is a story. It is a carnival. And it is entirely created for the purpose of entertainment. That's what it is. Nothing more. Even though within the script, if you will, itself, there's some pretty dark stuff. Pretty dark stuff. If I were to make this into a movie today, and if the title hadn't already been used for another movie, I would call it Reversal of Fortune. Right? Remember that movie about Klaus von Bülow, right? Because everything in it is a reversal of someone's fortune, right? It's the bad guys, and they're about to, control the world, and then suddenly, every one of those bad guys and their stories gets turned around completely, and the good guys take over, and all is well with the world, right? And in between, lots of craziness and intrigue, palace intrigue, and lots of sexual innuendo. And keep in mind, this is one of the reasons I'm sure the Essenes had no use for the Scroll of Esther. The name of God is not mentioned one time in the book of Esther. So in that sense, it has nothing to do with theology, religion, anything of the sort. Right? It's a scroll of entertainment. Right? And it was so beloved, and that's the reason that the sages eventually included into the biblical canon, right? Because there's no other, you can't explain it away. Of course, the commentators had to give some kind of reason, so they create an allegory. This is, even though God's not mentioned, this is God's work in the world behind the scenes, right? And God makes everything all right. But that's another story unto itself, right? So late 5th century, not based on any real historical events. Its intention was to entertain, to amuse, and that's it, right? And it does a great job of it, by the way, right? So think of it again. It's a play. It's meant to be experienced live and in person, acted out, right? And they do a fabulous job in all these ways, right? So as we get into the text a little bit, it starts like any story would begin. Back in the time of Ahasuerus, right? You know, the time of this and the time of that. There was a man, there was a woman, there was a king who ruled. There's similarities between this story, by the way, and the story of David, who rises, right, and Joseph as well, who rise from childhood and become, kings and all powerful and all the palace intrigue, right? So in terms of the storyline, it's not unique, even in biblical literature, right? And now for our purposes, which really, as well as the history of it and the text and how it got into the biblical canon, is also the way we perform it, right? And of course, as we know, this is Music Matters, and every single thing in Jewish life is sung and meant to be delivered through song. Same with the book of Esther, the Scroll of Esther. And because it's a biblical scroll, a text, it's chanted, as is the Torah and the prophets, the Haftarot, and all the other 5 Megillot we mentioned last time. We'll review those. It's chanted according to cantillation, right? Biblical trope. And just like the Torah itself, in the actual scroll, right, you can see there are the letters, no vowels, no trope. Okay? So one has to learn to chant it according to its cantillation system, all those trope signs, right? And Esther is one of the unique scrolls in another way, in the way it's chanted, because the book of Esther is the only biblical scroll that we still read from other than the Torah, number one. And number two, it's along with the book of Lamentations, it's the only scroll, including the Torah, that is chanted in its own unique cantillation. Right? Esther and Lamentations. Even the Torah scroll is chanted in 2 different ways, on Shabbat, weekdays, and then on the high holidays. Even the Torah has more than one melodic tradition. Esther has its own, and with lots of fun, crazy insertions. So to make this the drama of bringing the Scroll of Esther to life over the years, the sages, the practice became at certain phrases and certain parts of the story, to make it more expressive, they would insert different melodies. And most of them, when it's a sad moment or a dangerous moment, right? Suddenly the text is not chanted in the Esther melodies anymore, but we mentioned the other one, the Book of Lamentations, right? And I'll demonstrate some of those for you, right? There are also other phrases that you're supposed to just be celebrating, right? Like, yay, we killed 30,000 of them. And suddenly we chant it in this celebratory manner, right? I mean, all of this is, just tongue-in-cheek and a mockery, right? But it's all about the telling of the story, right? In another section where we're talking about the king, okay, suddenly you'll hear a phrase that's from the high holidays, right? We're talking about Hamelech, the king, and suddenly you'll hear the reference to the high holidays, like on Rosh Hashanah, when we talk about that section of kingship on Rosh Hashanah, right? So all these little fascinating details that have been become part of the tradition of chanting the Scroll of Esther. And of course, the most prominent one, when we sing out the name of Haman, we block it out, right? We make noise to obliterate even the sound of Haman's voice, right? This is fun. This is like for kids, right? So we make noise. We take our noisemakers and we blot out the name of Haman, okay? And the last thing we'll hear this morning when we get into the chanting itself is when we, at the end, when we get to the text where Haman and his 10 sons are hung, right? Reversal of fortune. It should have been Mordecai and Esther, right? Now it's Haman and his 10 sons. The tradition is that you're supposed to chant all the names of Haman and his sons in one breath without stopping. Because I think we mentioned it last time. Altogether, they weren't worth one breath of air. Right? So goes the story, anyway. And I exercised this morning, so I'm pretty sure I can make it through all 10 names today in one breath, right? So it's filled with all this, it's a carnival atmosphere, right? And I know everyone sitting in this gallery today, this is our memory of it from childhood, It's a Purim carnival. And anything goes, and it's craziness, and you dress up, you dress up, we wear masks, right? We're pretending, reversal of fortune, When else do you get to, you're encouraged to dress up as, your opposite, or even someone evil, right? So on the deep or dark side of all this, you could delve into all of that and seeking out the evil that is inside of us, the evil in society, all these things, the dark side of everything. And clearly there is that, there is a lot of that here in the story of Esther. We rarely get to the end of the scroll, after everyone is saved, right? It's after all of the celebration, after Haman and his 10 sons have been hung, and we celebrate, and there's light and joy throughout the land. End of story. Well, it's not the end of the story in the Scroll of Esther, because the last chapter, the writer goes into detail to describe how many people the Jews then went out and killed. 10,000, 30,000. So the scroll itself ends on a really dark, murderous rampage. But why focus on that, right? Because after all, it is a carnival at heart, right? So again, name of God doesn't appear in this scroll. It's time to party and have fun. We can also assume with some real confidence that this was a spring festival party welcoming the end of the winter season, and it's time, things are the rebirth of spring and everything. It was time of joy, right? That's basically what it's based on. So let's take a look at some of the chanting traditions of the book of Esther, the Scroll of Esther, as my amazing assistant Jessica titled this section, and she's exactly right? It is the scroll. So, Don Levy, let's take a look at our first group of phrases from Megillah Esther, right? And by the way, the word itself, Megillah, right? We associate it uniquely with Esther, but as we mentioned last week, there are chamesh, there are 5 Megillot. A Megillah really means the telling, or the story, right? But when specifically in the Jewish world, when we talk about Megillah, we're talking about, those 5 specific texts. Esther, the Song of Songs, the Book of Ruth, the Book of Lamentations, right? And then, of course, we have also Kohelet, right? Ecclesiastes. Those are the Chamesh Megillot. And each of them is very different from one another. They're from different time periods. Their focus is different. For instance, the book of Kohelet is easily, probably 200 or 300 years later than the Scroll of Esther, and it reflects a Hellenistic worldview, since Greek culture took over the Middle East. So this is one of those 5. So here's again what it sounds like a little bit. This is the first 5 verses from the Scroll of Esther, right? And before I do that, here's the tradition. Before we chant, right, from the book of Esther, unlike the other Megillot, we sing blessings. It's another fascinating difference. We sing blessings before we chant from the Scroll of Esther. Right? It's the only one of the 5 Megillot that we actually sing blessings before. Right? Not Song of Songs, not Lamentations, not Ecclesiastes, not the Book of Ruth, only the Scroll of Esther. So in that way, it takes its place, really, alongside the Torah itself and the Haftarah, the prophets. And you're going to notice that this melody is very similar, in fact, quite similar to the blessings over the shofar on Rosh Hashanah, right? It's very joyful and declamatory, right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al mikra Megillah. Right? And it ends with the third blessing, the Shehecheyanu, just like Rosh Hashanah over the shofar. Right? Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shechayanu v'kiyamanu v'yanu nazman hazeh. Loud and declamatory. And then the first few verses. Here's what it sounds like. Vayehi b'mei Achashverosh hu Achashverosh המולך מהודו ויד כוש שבע ויסרים ומאה מדינה בימים ההם כשבט המלך אחשוורוש על כיסא מלכותו אשר בשושן הבירה בשנת 3 למלכו עשה משתה לכל שריו ועבדיו חיל פרס ומדי הרפתמים ושרי המדינה לפניו בהראותו את אשר כבוד מלכותו ואת יקר תפארת גדולתו ימים רבים 800 יום ובמולות הימים האלה עשה המלך לכל העם הניצאים בשושן הבירה למגדול ויד קטן משתה 7 ימים בחצר גינת ביתן המלך. First 5 verses. That's all Esther cantillation trope. You'll notice that it's intended to be sung in a declamatory fashion, but also pretty fast, right? Because there's 10 chapters of this, and people are already drunk. So you don't want them getting too impatient. The story needs to move along, okay? Now, in this next section, you're going to hear from a couple verses from different sections, and these are those sections I mentioned where suddenly the melody is changing, right, for these few verses. And the first one is chapter 1, verse 7, if we can show the second batch of text on. So if you look at the first verse here, V'hashkot bichlei zahav zechelim mikelim shonim. Okay? Suddenly, what's about to happen is, it's foreboding what's about to happen. And this next, the next few sections here that you see, certain little phrases in them are chanted in Lamentations. Right? So if you look at the first one, it starts off with the opening phrase, normal Esther trope, but on the words, the fourth, fifth, and sixth words, v'chelim mikelim shonim, right? They're chanted in Lamentations trope. Here's what it would sound like. V'hashkot bichlei zahav, v'chelim mikelim shonim. And then back to Esther trope. So you really got to know what you're doing to chant the Scroll of Esther appropriately. And then next line, okay? These opening words, where you have Asher Hagla Yerushalayim im Hagala Asher Haglota, right? Translation: when he had been exiled from Jerusalem in the group that was carried into exile, right? Suddenly the melody it's mournful. It's back to Lamentations, right? Who had been driven into exile by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Not in Esther trope, sad, right? Asher Hagala Mirushalayim Im Hagola Asher Hagalata Im Yechanaya Melech Yehuda Asher Hagala Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel. Okay. And now, in this third sample you have here, and what now let's keep that up, Dan. There's one more there. One more to look at. Yeah, that third section, chapter 4, verse 1. Let's look at the text. When Mordecai learned all that had happened, right, that Haman was plotting to kill the Jews and the king agreed with him, he tears his clothes like Jewish mourners did and still do to this day. This is the origin of the Korea ribbon. He tears his clothes and he puts on sackcloth and ashes. That's the ritual attire of the one in mourning. And he goes through the city crying out loudly and bitterly. And here's what it sounds like, right? Mordechai yada et kol asher na'asa vayikra Mordechai et begadav vayilbasak vayefer vayetze betoch ha'ir vayizak zaka gedolah umarava. That's Lamentations cantillation. So we're telling a story through cantillation. Right? Now we can go to the next one. This next group of text, again, you'll see references to either something sad or bad or even celebratory. Let's take a look. Okay. So, Balayla Hahu, what happens? That night, sleep deserted the king, and he ordered the book of records, the annals, to be brought. It was read to the king. Okay? It starts off wandering around, but then we know what's going to happen. He's going to read the stories of when others rose up to annihilate the Jews, and it starts to change his thinking, of course, along with Esther, right? But at the end of the phrase, it all goes to, and it was read to the king, Nikra'im lifnei hamelech. And listen to the sound when we get to the end. You're going to recognize it. Balayla hahu nadida Shinat HaMelech. What did you hear there? Yeah, high holidays, that descending minor thread, to the word HaMelech. Right? And then, this next line, and so, Vayitlu et Haman, they impaled Haman. Now we're jumping up to chapter 7, verse 10, right? They impaled Haman on the stake, which he had put up originally for Mordecai. And the king's fury abated because he was madly in love with Esther now. She revealed this plot to kill her and her brother, or her uncle, whoever Mordecai was, and the Jewish people. And the king was on her side and was going to kill Haman anyway. So, Vayidlu et Haman, they impaled him, right? And the melody you're going to hear, it's not sad at all. Not sad at all. It's celebratory. Vayitlu et Haman al ha'etz asher echin leMordechai v'chamat hamelech shachacha. Let us rejoice in the impaling of the evil Haman. We celebrate the deaths of our enemies. And chapter 8, verse 16. What happens after this, right? Lahudim haitar orav v'simcha v'ason vikar. These words, the Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor. And by the way, we sing these words as an introduction to Havdalah every Sabbath evening. All right? Moving from Shabbat, we move from joy to joy, light to light. The first thing we do as we transition out of Shabbat to the rest of the week, we light those candles and we sing these words. The Jews enjoyed light and gladness, happiness and honor. And this is the origin of that text is Megillat Esther. And of course, La Yudim Torah v'simcha v'sason vikar. Major tonality, joyful, celebratory. Now, there's one last tropal musical tradition I want to share with you. And that is when we call out the names of Haman's 10 sons. And this is so bizarre to me. I think, Don, we can take the text off the screen. I'm going to show my actual scroll now. So there's one section at this part of the scroll where you're going to notice that the words are like 50 times larger than all the other words. You all see that? You know, you compare it to the regular text, and there. Okay. Big gaps between. It's like a 100 font. And just to think about that, those are the names of Haman's 10 sons. And at first glance, you think, why would the scribe do that? Why would they emphasize and enlarge the names of Haman's 10 sons? 10 times larger than anything else in the text. It's just comedy, humor, dark humor, right? Why else would they choose to, enlarge those names instead of anything else? Of course, remembering God doesn't appear in this story, right? So it's not like they're enlarging them and making them more prominent than God, right? But it's just a weird tradition, right? Kind of wacky. But the cantillation tradition is even wackier, as I mentioned earlier. They're so unimportant. They're so unworthy. We're going to chant all those names in one breath, right? all these contradictions and reversals of fortune, if you will. Look at these once celebrated, would-be executioners of the Jews. Yeah, we'll make their names large. Then when we call your names out, we're going to do all of you in one breath because you're worth nothing. Right? So in order to chant these properly, you just have to really know the. It's not even Hebrew. They're based on all kinds of other languages. All right, are you ready? I'm going to hold it up as best I can for you to see the text. Okay, let me shift to this side. Okay, once again, there are the names. Okay, you see them all? All right. So even I have to look at it, right? While I do it. So here we go. Viet parshandata viet alfon vera fasta viet pata viet adalia veridai viet parmana veridai viet aridai viet vaizechata. That's all they get. And right after that, it's Bnei Haman. The groggers are still going, right? We blot them all out of our memory. And even then, you can see after the 10 sons are listed, there's 4 more columns in Megillat Esther. And that's when the scribe tells us about all the other murders, the slaughters that happened throughout the land, beyond the city of Shushan, right? So I will tell you, it's the only way you hear the whole Megillah chanted today. You'd have to go to an Orthodox, shul on Erev Purim or in the morning and be prepared to drink a lot. I did have the occasion once when I was in my teenage years. I went with my my rabbi to a morning minyan at the Orthodox shul to hear. It was just like 15 people sitting like in a room, and hearing the rabbi chant the entire scroll. Took about 40 minutes. It's 10 long chapters, but it was a dazzling experience. Of course, there were shot glasses there. Thank you to my childhood rabbi who taught me the joys of life. But it's a really extraordinary tradition that we have, and it's an ancient tradition. We're talking a scroll from the latter half of the 5th century BCE, and it's fascinating also how we made it work for the Jewish people throughout time. We turned it into a children's holiday, a carnival. You get to dress up as characters in the play, right? In this moment, I still have a memory. I was in 1st grade. I remember my mom dressing me up for Sunday school, for Purim, and taking, like big hunks of cotton and taping them to my ears. And she put some paint to make me look, like a darker beard, and did my eyebrows. I insisted on wearing a Cleveland Indians baseball hat. I had to be true to myself, and I went as Mordecai, right? And what an amazing tradition that starts as this carnival, this fun play, and finds its way into the biblical canon for all time. And here we are in the 21st century, studying it, teaching it, singing it, celebrating it. It's almost more than you can comprehend, right? But here we are, talking about it and reliving it all the time, and that is what Jews do, right? We hold on to our texts, whether they are sacred or not. There's nothing sacred in the Scroll of Esther at all, and it was never intended to be at all. And this is a common theme with some of the other Megillot, as we mentioned just briefly last time, outlining the character of the Song of Songs, right, which is about the same age. It's all love poetry. It's explicit love poetry in places, physical love, right? And yet it became so beloved that the sages had to find a way to include it in the larger body of our biblical canon. And like the sages did with Esther, they kind of, retold the story, reimagined it, an allegory. Song of Songs is like that. Even the book of Kohelet, Ecclesiastes, there's nothing really. It is a anti-religious outlook on life, right? It's not about God at all. God doesn't figure into that scroll either. All of life is futile. Enjoy your life while it lasts, right? There's not a Jewish thing in there, at least as we think of Jewish, theology. So, questions and comments about this fantastically fun festival, which I invite you all to take part in. We have our Thursday night stuff going on for adults. We have some really funny comics. Obviously, this is all going to be online and pre-recorded stuff. But Penina, you can unmute yourself. You have to unmute. There you go, Penina. Thank you, Dan. Okay, I still can't hear Penina.
Penina, you need to unmute.
Okay, is that okay now?
Yes.
Okay. I had a really amazing teacher. His name was Tzvi Yehuda. And we studied the book of Esther in one of his classes.
Yeah.
And he brought a point that changes a little bit the face of the events, and the murder comes off the plate. The king already had an order put out to kill the Jews to satisfy Haman.
That's right.
According to him and his researches, he said that there was no way that the king was able to reverse his own orders. So there was no time after the discovery that Haman wanted to do whatever he wanted to do,
Right.
that there was no time to dismantle the order to kill the Jews. So there was an order that came out to give the Jews permission to defend themselves.
Right.
So while they were defending themselves, they killed all those people that came to kill them. So I wouldn't call it murder because it's a little too harsh. And it's a story also as that presents a warning that you wouldn't want to live in a country, even though you identify with everybody and you change your names to have Aramaic names or Persian names. Marduk was Mordechai was an idol. Esther was Ishtar. She was another idol. And they were very assimilated and they thought they were safe there. And it's a warning that you wouldn't want to live in a country or stay there and feel so comfortable when you need a permission to defend yourself. So I just wanted to express this piece of information because it changes a little bit the reason why also the Megillah was included into the Bible, because try to identify another person from another background does not make you safe, does not make you that person. You're still a Jew living in a foreign country. And as we even see today, there are some elements sometimes that remind us that they don't love us very much. And then some elements will tell us that we are. and admire us for what we do good. And that's the way the world turns. So
Everything
it's
you
the
said is I agree with entirely as a way of understanding, as a way of learning from this, and you are exactly right. If the sages had not done that, to interpret it that way or to reinterpret, it wouldn't have been in the biblical canon.
exactly
And all of these scrolls, all of these biblical texts have to come to teach us something about life as Jews, far more serious and more important than that in its origin and just unto itself, this was a carnival, right?
yeah.
But
Well,
even
the
in
manner.
comedy, right? In comedy, there is often a much deeper, darker truth, right? And that I believe that is exactly the case
Right.
here in
They
the
say the
Scroll of
truth comes
Esther,
out with a joke, right?
right? Right? And yeah, so it's true what they taught about all of that, because they couldn't just this couldn't have been in the Bible, as I said, if it were just some fun, frivolous,
Absolutely.
story, right?
Right.
So a deeper meaning has to be there, right? Even though God is not present, right? One could use that allegory too. Here's what happens when God is not in the world, when there is no
Exactly.
God present in the lives of human beings, right? We're lost, right? So, yeah, there's a much deeper and darker and more meaningful way to approach the text, beyond the truth of its origin, right? And that is something that it acquires over time.
What they say that he is one of the Golim, one of the people who were taken
Right.
from Israel down to Babylonia during maybe the Assyrian, maybe the Babylonians. Some people even identify Hashverosh with they give him a name of some kind of a king that lived in Persia at that time. So
Yeah, no, they definitely do. There's no historical evidence for that, but
right,
it's no different in a sense than we're talking about Shir HaShirim. And the opening phrase of Shir HaShirim ascribes the Song of Songs to who? King Solomon. Shir HaShirim Asher Li Shlomo. Song of Songs according to King Solomon. Now we know that the Song of Songs is written, at least 500 years after Solomon lived. So we know that King Solomon didn't write it. But they needed to do those things to, number one, be able to include with integrity in their own minds these texts into the biblical canon, to sit alongside the Torah scroll, the Psalms, the writings of the prophets. They had to find a way to make that work, which is the denial of neither the true origin or the more serious and elevated meaning of the text, right? Yeah. So it's and that's, by the way, I think that's what makes it so rich and so fascinating to dig into these texts. Love it. Who else has their hand raised? Yes, Merle.
As a child, yes, Purim was the Purim play and the Purim carnival and the hallways of the temple and the dress up, the whole frivolous Purim.
Right.
At about 12 or 14 years ago, when I was regional president for URJ, our first meeting was right before Purim. So we were studying the Megillah of
Right.
Esther. And a lot of really deep discussion about what the story was really about. And when you think in our minds and how long ago this was written,
Yeah.
and it became very relevant in many of our minds. There were like 20 of us that was almost very Holocaustish.
Mm-hmm.
And to think that when you thought when I think of this every year now as
Mm-hmm.
when I think of how far back this is written and how just like Torah, which we go through year after year after year more diligently than we do the Megillot, that I find it almost to a degree disturbing.
It is disturbing. Yeah. Yeah. If you that's one of the challenges when if you if you go with the interpretation of the sages, okay, that it's this deep, dark warning that the world hates the Jews, never trust anyone, wherever you live, sooner or later they will come for you.
It's a little
Yeah.
more current than we realized.
Well, historically, one would have a hard time arguing against that, right? But
Exactly.
but there's a deep problem with that way of thinking, also, right? Um, but it's there to study and to argue over and discuss forever,
That's for sure.
right? Yeah. So yeah, it's a paradox, right? And we're the richer for it. There are no answers to be found in texts like this. There are questions. But
Exactly.
as we conclude today, I would remind everyone that in its origins, okay, not what later century sages teach about it, which doesn't make those teachings less important or wrong in any way, right? Its meaning changes over time, but in its origins, the writer of this scroll, right, the intention was to entertain. Crazy, fun, wild story, right? And since it did last, right, we owe its endurance to the sages who reinterpreted it. Otherwise, it would have been lost forever, right? And it is fascinating, as Robert Alter points out in his discussion of it, that, as I mentioned as in the beginning, the fact that it doesn't even exist in the Qumran scrolls tells us that it still had not been reinterpreted in a deeper way by the sages during the time of the Essenes, right? That interpretation would come later by the rabbis, right?
Fascinating.
Right? Because for them, this was just a scrap of meaningless, secular garbage.
Dribble.
Yeah. But, the sages took it on because its popularity, was still in existence, and they grappled with it to their credit. So.
I'll let my grandchildren live in the comedic part of it.
Well, of course. Of course. Bad guys get punished and the good guys win.
Right. It's like
Right.
a Western.
It is. It completely, right? And who doesn't love a good Western?
Exactly.
But these are kind of these are eternal stories, right? And they all deal with eternal issues or eternal conflicts, right? and we should enjoy it and appreciate it in whatever way is meaningful to us, right?
That's why we have all these Purim programs all over the country.
We surely do.
Comedic as well as, with a message.
Right? Yeah. When we're done, I have to record kind of what I just taught with you. It'll be much shorter. I'm just going to do it all in 5 minutes. That'll be sent out one day this week, and then I have to chant my sections for the adult Purim thing this Thursday night. Right? I'll have a little fun with that. I'll see if I can put on a few different costumes for that, but it's tough during the pandemic. I really wanted to go out into the community and chant some, have my Scroll of Esther, like chant in front of Bloomingdale's, in front of Nate and Al's, But if I were in New York City with Linda, I'd be able to do that, right? I could even
For
sit
sure.
at a table at a restaurant.
At least
My
with-
cousin will let you
good.
come to her restaurants and chant
Right.
in Brooklyn.
I'm in Tashes.
I'd be
Yeah.
happy to have lunch with you any day.
All right. I'll let you know. Well, say a prayer because our daughter has applied to graduate school at NYU
Very good.
to the Steinhardt program. Do you know the Steinhardt family, Linda?
I do not. I know
Oh,
of,
shucks.
I would have written a letter immediately.
Oh, I know for sure. It's a program, a special program that's combines politics, media, and marketing.
Wow.
Oh, fantastic.
She's very passionate about it, and
That's
we're hoping and praying
wonderful.
that she gets into that program. Because if she does, then I can come and have lunch with you.
Excellent.
Yeah.
I look forward to it.
Yeah, me too. Me too. The other choice is a program at George Washington in D.C.
I can meet you there too.
Would not be bad, but I want New York.
Me too.
I want New York. Yeah. All right, everyone, enjoy.
Thank
Hopefully
you. This
you'll
was
join us
wonderful.
for our
Thank you.
Purim
Chag
celebration.
Sameach.
Right?
This was wonderful. Thank you.
You're welcome, and I'll see you also Friday night. For
Yes.
Shabbat
Right.
services. Rabbi Nanis and I will be doing our Friday